to Gisele Nguyen.
Can you see my screen?
Yes, yes,
All
Gisele.
right. Awesome. Awesome. All right. So I just wanted to say thanks to Meltem for giving me an opportunity to share some thoughts with you. I teach 4th through 6th grade right now, and so I prepared this presentation for the students. And the first question that I have is, why do humans have 2 ears and 1 mouth? I would love to get some responses, perhaps from some of the students, from Ada, EGFE, or Erin. I apologize if I'm pronouncing your name incorrectly, but I would love to hear from you. What do you think about answering this question? Why do you think humans have 2 ears and 1 mouth? Could you unmute and perhaps share your thoughts?
I have an opinion.
Please.
My opinion is to observe well the situation and hear it and see it and just speak for once after you evaluate everything.
All right. I love that. Is that Erin speaking?
Efe.
Efe. Oh, thank you. Thank you, Efe, for sharing. I appreciate you sharing your thoughts very much. And you're absolutely right. I mean, we have 2 ears to observe and to listen, right? And we have twice the amount of listening than we should speaking, right? And it has to do with our physiology. And so through this time that I have, what I'd like to do is to share with you some thoughts. And one of the first things that I would like to share is that research shows that students who communicate and listen, because listening and communication is 2 sides of the same coin, right? When you communicate and listen, you take initiative, students, based on the research, has better grades. And long term, there's more resilience, and they also experience success. And so what I'd like to do is to share with you a little bit about my story and share with you who I am. This is a picture of me when I was in 4th grade in America. So I'm Vietnamese. I came to the States when I was young, and this is a picture of me in my classroom. And here's another picture of me when I attended school. This is what school looks like in the US. I was in Mrs. Judy Sadler's class, and this is a typical day at school when I was in 3rd grade. And my parents, when we first came to America, they did not speak English. We did not have a lot social economically growing up. We have to start over from scratch because we were immigrants. And I had to work very hard in order to build our life, because my parents started from ground zero. And we did not have a lot of financial means. But what they did was they worked hard to allow my brothers and sisters and I, because there were 5 of us, to attend college. And I went to school and eventually got a master's degree. And I worked for a company called Coca-Cola. And this is a picture of me with some of my coworkers. And I ended up working for Coca-Cola and in different corporations for about 20 years, with leadership and management operations experience. I have a master's in business administration, and I'm currently pursuing a master's in education. And when I was at Coca-Cola, I worked with the 3rd largest retailer in the world at the time. That's Costco. You might be familiar with them. I'm not sure if there's a Costco in Turkey or not, but I managed a team. There were 30 people, and our annual business plan was 600 million. And currently, I manage 2 nonprofits. I'm the president of Inside the Outdoors and the Reach Foundation, and we create enrichment programs for Placentia Yorba Linda Unified School District. So that includes 34 schools, about 23,000 students in those 34 schools. And I also am CEO president of my own company. I'm Six Sigma Black Belt, which basically means that I'm good in operations. And I'm also a Toastmaster, and that's where I met Melton. All right. So that's just a little bit about me. And what I'd like to share with you today is 3 techniques to active listening. Before we started, Melton gave me a couple of questions to answer throughout this presentation, and I hope to answer those questions along the way. So the 3 techniques that I want to share with you today is related to EIP: energy, intention, and being present. And I'm going to go into that in a little bit more detail here, but I want to share with you these 3 techniques that I learned throughout my work experience. All right. So the first thing has to do with energy. And what do I mean by that? I hope that there's some interaction throughout this presentation. So if you would turn on your video so I could see you and interact with you. But when I talk about energy, how many of you walk into the kitchen of your home, and even before your parents say anything, you know that they are in a good mood or a bad mood? How many of you could sense their energy even before they say anything? If you could give me a thumbs up or raise your hand. Yes. Great. Well, I believe that we are all energetic beings. That's why you're able to sense whether somebody is in a good mood or a bad mood. Even when you walk into the room, you could feel their energy. And I think communication is about the transferring of energy. And this was said by Mark Abraham from Stanford University. He has a podcast that's called Think Fast, Talk Smart. It's a wonderful podcast that I'd highly recommend. And when you think about energy as a process of, communicating, it's something that we don't talk about because it is kind of an elusive idea, but it really leads into the next 2 points that I want to share with you. Because when you're listening actively, you are using all of your senses, and you're able to detect the energy from your speakers, right? And you're able to more effectively communicate and listen. So the next concept that I wanted to share is intention. And what do I mean by intention? So earlier today, I took my daughter to soccer, and I asked her the question, my daughter, who is 14 years old, and I asked her, Michaela, what does it mean to be a good listener? And she said, what? What do you mean by good listening? We don't think about listening because it's something that we do every day, and we do it all the time, and we do it automatically, right? But when you listen with intention, when you think about what you want to learn when you're listening to the speaker, you're able to absorb and listen with so much more clarity. So when I asked her that question, she was taken back because she typically does not think about listening. And so I said, well, what does it take to be a good listener? Her answer is, Mom, when I'm in math class, because she takes math through a Zoom class, she's taking geometry, and she's in 8th grade, and it's an advanced math class. And because it's advanced, she has to go on this Zoom call to attend this class because there's only 4 students in her school. So she has to attend the Zoom class at another school in order to take this geometry class. And she says, one of the things that I try to do is I try not to zone out, because when you are studying on Zoom, it's very easy to get distracted. So she has to really focus and be intentional about learning in order to stay focused. And so in order to be an active listener, you have to focus your intention and set the intention that you want to be present, that you want to be there, that you want to listen and you want to learn. Otherwise, it's very easy to be distracted. All right. There's a quote here, and what I'd like to do is to ask one of you to read this. May I ask one of you to read this? Maybe Ada?
Of course. We think we listen, but very rarely do we listen with real understanding, true empathy. Yet listening of this very special kind is one of the most potent forces for change that I know. Carl Rogers.
Thank you, Ada, very much for reading that. So Carl Rogers is a psychologist, a behavioral psychologist. And, in this quote, he says that it's very rare that people listen with real understanding, right? Because many times people listen with the intent to respond. They're not really truly listening. But when you're truly listening, you are absorbing, you are listening with empathy. And it takes intention to truly listen to what the other person is trying to communicate. And that goes beyond the words that they're speaking. It has to do with body language. It has to do with listening to what their intention is as they're speaking and sharing with you. And we're going to talk about some techniques on how to do active listening in just a little bit. But I want you to start thinking about what active listening requires, right? And in this quote, Carl Rogers talks about the power of active listening. All right. And so the last concept is presence. Can somebody read this quote, if you would, please, from Brian McGill? E.G. or Efren?
Sure, I can read it.
Thank you.
You're welcome. One of the most sincere forms of respect is actually listening to what another has to say. Brian McGill.
Thank you very much. Do you agree with that? Can somebody give me an example of a time when they felt like they were really being listened to?
Like when they ask you questions after your presentation or during the presentation.
Yes, yes. So Ada, earlier when you were giving a speech, you talked about teamwork, and you also talked about how communication helps you to solve problems and how communication and listening helps you to build strong relationships. So when you are having a conversation with someone and they are actively listening, it's the deepest form of respect when you're listening to someone share a message. And when you repeat back what they have said, yeah, it feels like you were heard. And it's a really deep sense of respect.
Yeah.
And so, yes, Ada. And so I love what you shared earlier. And there was so
Thank you.
There was so much wisdom in what you shared. And then so
Thank you.
So I'm so proud of you for sharing and putting that speech together. And, you were truly present in sharing that message. And I think many of us were engaged in active listening as a result of the energy that you shared when you were giving that speech. All right.
Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome, honey. All right. So here are 4 ways that you could express active listening when you're in a conversation, right? So when you're having a conversation with someone in person, one of the best ways to show that you're actively listening is to show eye contact, right? And sometimes it helps when you tilt your head a little bit because it indicates to them that you're actively listening. And when you are listening, sometimes it's helpful to respond with some verbal affirmation. You could nod your head, or you could say, "Oh, I see," or you could say, "Uh-huh, yes," right? Because it helps them to understand that you're listening. And another great way to show that you're actively listening is to paraphrase what they've said. And here's an example. And I'm going to give you a tip from a professional that I listened to recently, and he is a professional hostage negotiator. And this is kind of funny because, as a hostage negotiator, he's negotiating with someone who is not mentally stable, right? It's an intense situation. There's a hostage crisis, and there's a lot of pressure and a lot of stress, right? Because he's trying to negotiate the release of a hostage that is, in prison. And so what this negotiator said is one of the ways that is successful in negotiating is he practices reflective listening and reflective responses. And what he does is that he paraphrases exactly what the hostage holder is wanting. And one technique that he uses all the time is he repeats the last 3 words that they have said. And so my suggestion is that when you are listening to your mom or your parents or your teacher, one of the best things to do is to practice reflective response by repeating the last 3 words that they've said, right? Because it shows that you're actively listening. So when your parents are saying, I really, before you go out this weekend to go to the movies with your friends, I want you to do the dishes, clean up your room, and do your homework, right? So they're listing all these things. And if you respond back and you say, "All right, Mom, I will do my homework and pick up the laundry," right? So you just repeat the last 3 words that they have said, and I assure you, they're going to feel like you've listened to them. All right. So practice reflective responses by paraphrasing exactly what they've said. And then number 4 is ask active questions, right? And those open-ended questions also help the speaker to understand that you are actively listening, that you want to understand more. And when you ask them thoughtful questions, they're going to want to continue the discussion, right? So when you practice these 4 techniques, it's going to help you to become a more active listener. If there's any questions, I would welcome them. All right. All right. Feel free to jump in anytime. So I'm going to end with the last question that Meltem asked me to discuss, and that is, what are some of the common mistakes that you should avoid? So during a conversation, whether you're having a conversation with your parents or relationships in the future, one of the things that you could do is avoid interrupting or finishing somebody's sentence, right? So, because when you cut in and you interrupt someone in the middle of a sentence, that's a sign of disrespect, right? Number 2, judgment. this is connected to the energy transfer again, right? When I have a conversation with somebody and maybe we disagree, I could look into the person's eyes and know that I'm being judged, right? So it comes with the intention that you have. And when you're judging somebody, what they're going to do is they're going to pull back and they're not going to want to share. So when you have a judgment about what somebody's saying, what somebody is sharing with you, and maybe you disagree, if you want them to continue, you want to withhold your judgment and maybe just keep an open mind, allowing them to express their point of view and maybe come back with a question so that you could better understand where they're coming from, right? And try to avoid having judgment, even though it's a very natural thing to do. And when you listen with an open mind, open heart, it helps to continue the dialogue, right? And then number 3, avoid distractions. And many times, I mean, how many times have you had a conversation or are in a meeting and all of a sudden the iPhone goes off or, your phone is vibrating? I mean, that's a distraction that could be a sign of disrespect. So you want to avoid these 3 common mistakes that often happens. It happens to me all the time as well. All right. And so I want to end with this quote, and I would like to ask someone to read that for me, please. Don't all jump in at the same time.
I can read.
Yes, thank you.
Listening with calm and understanding can ease the suffering of another person. Thich Nhat Hanh.
Thank you. Thank you. He is a Buddhist and a philosopher from Vietnam. And I love this quote because to me, it is so true. When you have a conversation with someone, and let's say you're hurt, you are experiencing a crisis, a personal crisis, or you're depressed, or you're upset about something, maybe you broke up from a relationship or somebody said something that hurt your feelings. When you're able to talk to a friend or talk to an adult, a teacher, a friend, and they really understand and they share some words to help you overcome your emotions, they are helping you to release that suffering that gives you a sense of hope and a sense of release. That is the deepest, the biggest level of respect that you could experience from that person. And so when you have an opportunity to help your friend, especially when they're going through a crisis or they're suffering from something, I would encourage you to practice active listening so that you could help them overcome their suffering and help them to overcome the sadness that they are experiencing so that they can move on. And that is how I would like to end. Oh, this is another quote, but we'll save that for another time. All right, that's it. Back to you.